Now, I'm very happy and glad to introduce to you our two panelists for this session, and that is Joyce Kaufman, who happens to be a family law practitioner and our current GLAD president, as well as Polly, who many of you are very familiar with, who is our GLAD staff attorney. So, Polly or Joyce, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I'll begin. My name is Joyce Kaufman, and I am presently the chair of the GLAD Board of Directors. And I've been practicing family law for 28 years, and most of that time doing LGBTQ family law. I am a lesbian mom myself, and my daughter has three very proud legal parents. And full disclosure, Polly and I used to be law partners, and we've have a long history together of doing this kind of work, and I'm really happy to be here doing this with her today. Polly?
Thank you so much, Joyce. Yeah, this feels like our old law firm. It's so good to be here today, and we're really here because we've heard from so many families across New England with just questions, worries, concerns. I think in this current political environment, with the appointment of Amy Coney Barrett, with the Fulton case, with Justice Thomas and Alito's statements, we understand there's some normal concern. People are feeling unsettled, and we just want to be here to answer some of the questions we've gotten, provide information, and in many ways just reassure the community that particularly in New England, there are so many protections for our family, and we want to make sure people kind of understand how to access those protections, understand how to get active if you want to get active, and just be a resource for people in a time of unsettling times. And just personally, so my name is Polly. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I have been at GLAD for 4 years, where I work predominantly on youth and family issues. And prior to GLAD, I was a family lawyer in practice with Joyce, and I was also a clerk in our probate and family courts in Massachusetts. So really, family law is at kind of the core of what I do. I'm also a non-biological parent of two lovely children. I have completed adoptions of them myself. And so I have a personal connection to this issue as well. And obviously have seen a lot of friends and community members uh, go through adoption and other ways to secure their parentage. So it's great to be here. Please feel free to pose questions in the chat. We're not here to provide legal advice for particular situations. We actually have a phenomenal referral network of people. And we also have a few state experts on this call who showed up today, who I'm so happy to have here as well. So we're not here for particular legal advice for your situations, but to kind of just answer broadly some pressing questions the community has. And certainly we remain available to provide referrals to folks through our Glad Answers line. So Joyce, let's get started.
Okay, great. So, Polly, first question is, what if parents have completed an adoption or have a judicial decree of parentage? Is that at risk now?
No. So I want folks to hear that really loud and clear. If you have an adoption decree, your adoption is secure. Adoptions are final, they can't be undone. They're really excellent protection for our children. And the Supreme Court ruled in a 2016 case, VL versus EL, that every state has to give adoption decrees full faith and credit. So what that means is that no matter where you travel, all jurisdictions have to respect your adoption decree. So for our families, an adoption decree really provides great security, and should calm any fears. You're good.
Okay, so what about for parents who are married? When children are born in marriages, both parents are on the birth certificate. Is that enough? Is marriage enough? Or should these parents still do a co-parent adoption?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it comes up all the time. And obviously, Joyce, share I want to hear your advice you give to clients in Massachusetts too. But I will say, really, marriage is an incredibly important protection, right? And existing marriages can't be undone. The marital presumption of parentage is a child is born into a marriage, and both of those parents are the child's parents. It's a very important protection. All New England states will list a marital parent as parents on the birth certificate. But it's important to remember that a birth certificate is evidence of parentage, but it's not parentage itself. And we still recommend that people do co-parent adoptions. and not rely solely on the marital presumption, so that the non-biological parent in particular is protected in every jurisdiction. It's really the most security lies in an adoption decree. It's an insurance policy. It's belt and suspenders. It is kind of the gold standard of protections for parentage. So a marital presumption, again, really an important protection. You're automatically from birth going to be recognized as a parent in the state where you are. But in order to have that protection and security everywhere, we really recommend still co-parent adoptions. Does that make sense? Do you want to add anything to that, Joyce?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, what I usually say to my clients is that you want to think of it like an insurance policy. Like if you have homeowners insurance, you certainly don't hope that your home burns down, but if it does, you have that policy to help you. And the same is true with an adoption decree. You certainly hope you're never going to need it in some kind of hostile jurisdiction or chaotic situation, but if you do need it, you will have it. And I think, of course, nobody wants to have to adopt our own children, but personally, I'm grateful that we can, because it gives us that extra protection, so that we don't have to worry about anybody challenging the parentage of our children.
Let's talk a little bit now about what the adoption process entails, because that might be helpful for people to know. The adoption process, of course, differs in every state, right? Adoption is a state law process. You're using the state adoption codes, and you have to satisfy those statutes in order to adopt your child. So every state has a little bit of a different process. And in many states in New England, you can ask a court to waive the home study requirement, to waive a notice requirement, and to waive any waiting period requirement if one of the parents, if it's a co-parent adoption, right? If one of the people gave birth to the children and you're confirming the parentage of the other parent. Obviously, this doesn't apply for kind of traditional adoptions if you're adopting a child to whom you're a legal stranger to. All of those requirements still apply. The only state in New England that has a more burdensome process is Rhode Island, which does, in many instances, still require home study. But the Rhode Island Parentage Act passed in 2020, which should really streamline that process, and also opens up additional paths to parentage that are very important and allow people to avoid any burdensome requirements such as a home study or waiver of notice. Do you want to pop in a little bit more about the Massachusetts process, since that's your area of expertise?
Sure. I mean, it's been my experience that although we have to request waiver of certain of the requirements of the adoption statute, it's almost never an issue. The judges pretty routinely waive the requirement of notice, or the requirement that there be a home study, or that you wait until the child has lived in your home for 6 months. So none of those are an issue. And for married couples, the court allows an administrative allowance of the adoption, which means that you don't have to appear for a hearing as you might have had to a couple of years ago. So it can all be done through the papers, and it's a lot of pieces of paper, but it's not a particularly complicated process. And I usually recommend that people start pulling together the paperwork before they have the baby, if possible, so that as soon after the baby is born as possible, you can file it and get it done. So it's not that difficult a process. And one other note I'd want to say is Polly handled a case called Adoption of a Minor, which a few years ago confirmed that a donor who donates to married couples is not a legal parent entitled to notice. So whether you have a known donor or an anonymous donor, if you're a married couple, you will not have to give notice or obtain a surrender from a donor. Ready to move on, Polly?
Yeah.
So what about people who can't afford to hire an attorney to do an adoption, or who might have a criminal record, noting that in most states, people petitioning to adopt have to have a criminal record check. What do you say about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think adoption I think that adoption is often helped by having legal advice. I mean, certainly, I think it's always helpful to reach out to a lawyer and be able to access a lawyer. I think that GLAAD does have a referral list for lawyers who have experience in this area. A lot of those lawyers will do kind of low bono, right? Have a reduced fee for this kind of work. And it's good to kind of shop around and see what those costs are. Some states also have their forms online to make it accessible for people to do adoptions without a lawyer. And for instance, in Massachusetts, you have a publication, Joyce, which really walks people through that process. And I could share that link at the end of the session to really guide you. Because I think that adoption is a process that people can do on their own. In terms of criminal records, I've actually represented people with criminal records and successfully moved through the adoption process. I think particularly when you're doing a confirmatory adoption, it's really an opportunity to say to the court, I'm confirming parentage of a child who's already my own, and this criminal record shouldn't be a bar to that adoption. And simply explain to the court the circumstances for that criminal record and, work to move through it. And it's also a reminder to me of the importance of some legislation pending in Massachusetts in particular, and it's already passed in some other states, to try to kind of codify a process that's more streamlined for parents who are confirming their adoption, right? Confirming their parentage. That for people who are using parentage to get security against discrimination in other states, that we want to have a more streamlined process. And that would also include, not having any criminal record for the parent being a bar to adoption. So in my mind, you really want to make sure that every parent can secure their legal relationship to their child in as streamlined a way as possible.
Great, great. So, Polly, as you're aware, some states have expanded access to a document called a voluntary acknowledgement of parentage. And I'm wondering if you can explain what that voluntary acknowledgement is and how it protects our families.
Sure. So a voluntary acknowledgement of parentage is a form that people can sign in the hospital to establish parentage of their child at birth. Federal law actually requires every state to have this kind of simple administrative process to establish parentage of children for unmarried parents. And in recent years, this kind of administrative route, right, which is free, it can be done right at birth and doesn't require a lawyer, has been expanding to include more families. And this is particularly in New England has really made strides to expand access to voluntary acknowledgements. People can sign them in Vermont. So if you have a child, if you're an LGBTQ person who's had a child through assisted reproduction, you can sign a VAP in Vermont to establish your parentage. The same will be true in Rhode Island as of January 1, 2021, when the Rhode Island Uniform Parentage Act goes into effect. And if you're an unmarried couple in Massachusetts, you can also sign a voluntary acknowledgement of parentage. So it's an expanding right in the states. It's also available in a number of states that are not New England states. And someone just put in the chat our resource about VAP, so you can see if it applies to your state. But I think this expanded access to this route to parentage is really a positive development for our community because it allows you, assuming you meet the requirements for signing one, to establish parentage at birth in the hospital.
Yeah. So it's a really, really special thing that we can do that, and it's extremely rare across the country. So it's only a very few states who have allowed.
Yeah, I think it's 9 states at this point.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
And thank you, Polly, for your work to get that done. So for people who are worried about protections in their state or want to get more actively involved, what can they do?
Great question. So we'd love to have folks join our efforts in New England. And that's true of many states. I think that statutory reform efforts to protect parentage are really powerful. And in New England, we've worked the Maine Parentage Act. We've worked in collaboration to pass comprehensive reform in Maine in 2015, Vermont in 2018, Rhode Island in 2020. New Hampshire recently expanded their protections. For instance, unmarried parents can now adopt in New Hampshire, and there's now confirmatory adoption in New Hampshire as well. So New England has really made tremendous progress over the past decade. And we currently are working in collaboration with local partners on statutes, bills that are filed in Massachusetts and in Connecticut. So in Massachusetts, we have the confirmatory adoption bill, as well as the Massachusetts Parentage Act, which would bring protections to Massachusetts along the lines of we've been talking about for other states. And in Connecticut, the Connecticut Parentage Act will be filed again in January of 2021 when that session starts. So I assume some links will go into the chat. We are always welcoming people, particularly impacted families, to participate in those efforts, provide testimony to the legislature, share your story so that we can really educate people about our families and how much we need these protections. Because some people still just don't understand how our families get created, how we need protections. And we would love folks to get involved and share their stories and participate in the ground level of that work. The Rhode Island Uniform Parentage Act was actually based in a family coalition, which was a really phenomenal group of parents and children who, just kept at it with the State House over a number of years, and it successfully passed in July. So the power of individuals to get active in their state legislatures is really tremendous.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that, Polly. It's so important that as a community we work together to get these things moving forward and increase the protections that we have.
Well, and I also want to say that even without statutory protections, as a community, I mean, GLAD actually, with a number of organizations, has put together a pledge, because I think even in some states that might not have the comprehensive reforms yet, like Massachusetts and Connecticut, that we can pledge to each other as a community to protect our relationships with our children and not use those inequalities against each other. In any event, I encourage folks to look at that pledge and kind of understand that we can also protect ourselves by not using arguments against each other.
Right. Thank you for that. Okay, so there are a few questions that we received from you people who are attending, and we're going to throw these out. One person says that I'm in Maine. What can I do before birth to help pave the way for parentage?
Excellent. I'm actually, Chris, do you mind throwing you're a Maine family lawyer. Do you want to answer that one?
Great. Can people hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I have some ideas, but I'd love to hear from a Maine person.
Yep. So in Maine and in New Hampshire, we can do what's called a pre-birth parentage determination. And that's where we go to the court after pregnancy has been achieved, but hopefully before the birth. And we can get a court order that states that both parents are in fact legal parents, or a single person, depends upon what your family situation is. And that's something that goes to both the hospital and the state vital records, so that there's absolutely no confusion about people being parents. And particularly with COVID, that can be pretty handy, because some of the hospitals will not let people in if they're not giving birth or married. So I've seen with same sex couples coming from overseas that a lot of them want to get pre birth orders these days because of COVID, not just for immigration, but also so they can get in the hospital and actually care for their child. And that's something that can also be done after the birth, but obviously before the birth is better. At least in Maine, a pre-birth order, a post-birth order, or adoption are pretty much interchangeable.
And I also want to, I mean, I know that Maine Vital Records has a form. I'm not sure how practically it's used, Chris, but you can sign a consent to assisted reproduction, which I think if folks aren't going to go to court, I want some security that, hey, it's crystal clear, I've consented to assisted reproduction, that I am a parent under those assisted reproductive technology laws, that you can sign that consent form. Is that fair to say?
And that's just like a voluntary acknowledgement of paternity, and it's an administrative act in the state. It's probably going to be just fine, but of course, it's one of those things that a judgment's always better, because judgments, without question, get full faith and credit.
No, I absolutely agree that you need to do a judgment afterwards. But in terms of if you're, and just the clarity, I think that's a helpful form for folks to be aware of. Joyce, was there another question from the audience?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is a really good question too. It's someone wrote in saying that they have two children, ages 15 and 21, and have not secured legal parentage. What's the most expedient way to establish parentage, particularly of the minor child?
Yep, it's a great question. I think obviously it depends on what state you're in, to determine what the most expedient way to do that is. But I think the good news is with older children, if you're going to do a co-parent adoption, it's much more straightforward, right? An adoption of adult is a very streamlined process with not a lot of paperwork. and the adult just has to consent to the adoption and set up and do some of those basic pleadings. Even for a 15-year-old child, a child who's over 14, in most states needs to consent to their own adoption, and it's a somewhat more streamlined process. But Joyce, do you want to add to that?
Just to say that in Massachusetts, it's extremely simple to do an adult adoption. There's no one needs to be notified. It's very, very straightforward. And for a child over the age of 14, the statute does not require a home study. You might have to deal with notice if there is another legal parent involved, but it's really very straightforward under most circumstances. I'm wondering if there's any more questions. Quinn, are there any questions that you've received? I'm not seeing any.
Yeah, so Dana did ask that at this point, if you have a VAP, do you need a 2PA?
A second parent adoption. Good question. Polly, do you want to answer that?
So here's what I'll say about VAPs and why I love the VAPs, other than being a very easy and inexpensive tool to use. Under federal law, VAPs are the equivalent of a court decree of parentage. So they are theoretically stronger than the marital presumption because they are, again, the equivalent of a court decree. They should be recognized in all states. Now, VAPs are an emerging right. They're not expanded in every single state. So I think if people are feeling really nervous about that, they should, talk to a lawyer in their state to get advice on that. They can always still do a co-parent adoption if they want that insurance policy, those belt and suspenders. But again, VAPs are the equivalent of a court decree and should be recognized.
Thanks for that. And another question that just came in is from Elizabeth saying that you said a marriage is irrevocable. Does this mean if we're already married, nothing the Supreme Court does can revoke that? I can tell you what I think about that, and then you can chime in.
Go ahead, Joyce. Yeah.
So my feeling is that the Supreme Court, even if the Supreme Court were to overturn Obergefell, which I think is unlikely, and there's no case in the works right now that even addresses that issue. But even if the worst possible thing happened and Obergefell were overturned, people who were legally married when it was legal to do so would still be married. That's my opinion. Do you agree, Polly?
Yes, I think it would be an absurd result. I think if you're already married, that you're married, you're secure. And I will say, I think LGBTQ people and LGBTQ married people are truly part of the fabric of the country, and the vast majority of the country supports marriage equality. And yeah, if you're already married, I think you're fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another question just came through from someone saying, we have 3 children and only one born in Mass after marriage equality was passed federally. Both of us are on the birth certificates of the 2 born in Mass, but only one of us on the birth certificate from New York in 2008. Is there a way to streamline adoption in Massachusetts? Well, I can answer that pretty straightforwardly. Streamline, doesn't really apply, but it actually is a very easy, straightforward process to do an adoption, a co-parent adoption in Massachusetts. And I would urge you to contact an attorney to find out how, but I would say it's pretty straightforward and pretty simple.
That was me. Can I ask a question?
I'm sorry?
I said that was me. That was my question. Can I ask another one?
Sure.
Sure.
So our eldest, born in 2008, was born in New York, and that was before, obviously, both of us were allowed to be on the birth certificate. Am I going to have to go through this in New York? Are we going to have to do this in New York also, or can we just do it in Massachusetts? We live here in Massachusetts.
Yeah. Go ahead, Polly.
So you generally, and again, I'm not giving you legal advice, and just
No,
providing
legal
information, which is generally you do an adoption where you reside and where the child resides. Usually that's the court that has jurisdiction over you. And then you'd get a decree of adoption that would be sent to the New York Vital Records, who would then update the birth certificate. So it's kind of a two-step process. So you
I
get the
see.
decree here, and then that would update the vital records in the state the child was born.
And meaning you do not have to do another adoption
Right.
in New York.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, so do we have time for, do we have, I have no idea what time it
It's
is.
12:31, so I think we could take, if there are more questions, we could grab those, but otherwise, I think we're running out of time. Is that right, Quinn? Okay.
So what I'm thinking, Polly, I was, there is one question that we had thrown around, and maybe be reassuring to people for you to answer this, or maybe for me. You're an LGBTQ parent yourself. How are you feeling these days?
Well, I mean, that's a loaded, there's not enough time to answer that question, but I will say generally as a parent, I mean, it's obviously unsettling. I feel oftentimes I'm doing like overload work to remind my children that about democracy and the strength of our country and all of those good things. But as a parent, I feel really secure, right? I've got my adoption decrees. I take in my amended birth certificates. I actually travel with them everywhere. I feel good knowing that nobody's going to interfere with my relationship with my children because I have that security. I take it with me everywhere. I've only had to use it once, and yeah, and I feel lucky to live in a region of the country where there are so many protections available and where we're working really hard to increase them every day.
Right, right. Well, I feel the same way, so I'm really glad to know that. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming, and I think there are a lot of links in the chat, and obviously a lot of resources on our website. And Quinn, did you have any closing words?
I'm just like to let people know that we shall be sharing the video alongside the links that were shared. And in case you happen to get any more questions, please don't be shy. Feel free to reach out to us. And thank you all for coming.
Yes. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.